No, I took it because I like it. I knew
Really
that
got it
that's
for your
weird.
grandpa?
No, my brother got it from him. And he was like, this is a girl's shirt.
And her grandpa said, I hate her.
Yeah, I was confused. I was like,
And the only way I can tell that Herman the process here is the glow
Mr.
of
Lee said,
devices.
could we take a quiz on section 3 of the verbs today if we review ask you for
No.
a friend? Why would you say ask you for a friend?
Let's just say no.
But still say no, because
Say yes.
No, we probably could. If we do quick
Otherwise he's gonna be mad.
Doubt he's gonna be mad if he asks like that. Has he ever asked before? About that stuff? No. Usually he just says.
Say,
obviously
say
he
yeah,
is-
but then I don't know if we'll be able to do anything tomorrow.
Could I say review today, quiz tomorrow?
Or just say yeah, but I don't know if we'll be able to see anything tomorrow. Say review today, quiz today, and then start the next chapter tomorrow.
Feel my computer. It's like an icebox. It was in my garage too.
Oh, Harley Bird. Yeah, I have the opportunity to get that. So I've never
Yeah.
Okay, today I'm going to lecture on chapter 21, which is the evidence for evolution. And so when Darwin presented his idea of evolution, it was revolutionary. It ranks along Copernicus' theory that the sun is at the center of the universe, or sorry, not the universe, the solar system, instead of Earth, and Newton's laws of motion, as well as Einstein's theory of relativity. But I'm sure you guys have heard the backstory with Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace. They both came up with the idea of evolution independently. After Darwin traveled the HMS Beagle to the Galapagos Islands and returned, he actually started to write a book. And then, he shared it with a few of his colleagues, and then he put it in a drawer and left it there for 20 years. Because I don't want to say he was afraid, but, his family had a lot of priests and pastors. He had a very strong religious background. In fact, he thought about becoming a pastor himself, and at the idea of creationism, that was what everyone thought. And so he didn't really want to rock the boat, but he wrote his ideas down, documented it. Like I said, it's a very dry read on the origin of species. I'm only on chapter 7 right now. There's 12. It's just very tedious. But Alfred Wallace, he was a geologist and came up with this, idea too. He started to document things, and then he shared his idea with Darwin, and Darwin's like, oh crap, like he's got the same idea. Maybe I should, beat him to the punch. I've already got this book written, so I should publish it. But these two did, at a joint conference to the scientific community, present their ideas together. But Darwin gets the credit because he published his book first. So. But the breakthrough was not easy. Like I said, creationism, that was the lead-in theory. All species were created independently by God 6,000 years ago. There are still people that, believe this. I have some in-laws that believe that Earth is only 6,000 years old. And they always try to egg me into a conversation at family gatherings. But, oh, wow.
Once every 30 seconds.
Darwin believed that Earth was very ancient, that it was older than 6,000 years ago, and that species do change throughout time. So there are two components to scientific theories. You have to have like a pattern, make your claim. You have to have a series of observations, and then the facts, how they are in nature, and then the process that drives the theory. In this case, natural selection drives evolution. And so you have to have lots of observations that support your theory. You have to be able to make predictions and then watch it happen, and it has to fit with the theory. So we have several theories in science, like the cell theory, that states that all living things are made of cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. Cells come from other cells. Until one of those statements is false, that theory will hold. So like a theory is not theoretical, it's fact in science. So until we come across something that refutes one of those statements, that's the way it is. So the theory of evolution is actually held up by two things. Natural selection, that's the mechanism for how it happens. And then the other pillar, the fossil record. We're going to talk about anatomy in animals, molecular biology, as well as biogeography. So that's what this lecture is going to be about. We'll talk briefly about natural selection. I'll talk about Darwin's Galapagos finches, as well as some other examples of natural selection. And then I'll talk about these other 4 fields that provide evidence for evolution. So the beak of the Galapagos Islands. When Darwin visited the Galapagos Islands back in 1835, he collected 31 species of finches from 3 different islands, and he had a really hard time identifying them. So he brought them back to England and had his friend look at them. He thought that they were Werns, grosbeaks, blackbirds, but it turned out that they were all kind of sort of the same species. So John Gould, that was Darwin's friend, said that his were a group of distinct species, all very similar. Today, there are 14 recognized finches on the islands, and they're all categorized by their beak and what they eat. So there are certain finches that just eat fruit, and there's a group that eat insect and cactus and seed, and then it describes what their bills are like: crush-in bills, probing bills, grasping, parrot-like bills, and so like these 3 are considered tree finches, and a warbler finch, and a ground finch. And so after the start of semester 2, we're actually going to look at the ground finches and their beak size and how they've changed on the island. So the Galapagos finches do exhibit variation, and that variation is related to how they get their food. So the beaks are tools that help them achieve their nutrition. And Darwin quoted in his book, observations suggest difference among species in beak size and shape and have evolved as the species adapted. Modern research has verified Darwin's selection hypothesis to use different food sources. So remember our 3 conditions for natural selection. You have to have variation. Yep, that's a check. We have different beak sizes. The variation has to lead to a difference among individuals in lifetime reproductive success. Yes, that is true, because during drought, the larger your beak, the higher survival rate versus those that have small beak. Or rainy season, that's vice versa, it's flipped. So yes, put a check mark there. Variation among individuals must be genetically transmitted to the next generation. Here's where Peter and Rosemary Grant come in, where they go back every year and capture finches and record. They know which birds mated and which offsprings they developed, and they capture and they measure beak size and how it relates to heritability. And yes, they have proven that beak sizes can be transmitted to the next generation, which I just kind of said right here. So they studied the medium ground finch on Daphne major. And like I said, you will see their data. They tend to feed on smaller, tender seeds, but then they can resort to the large, drier seeds when a drought occurs. So like I said, they measured every single bird. I mean, we're talking about weights, wingspan, everything, not just the beak, okay? Found a great deal of variation, and that the average beak depth did change according to environmental conditions. So, could changes in beak dimension reflect an action of natural selection? So then they had to look at parent beak size to offspring beak size, and this is what they did. They examined it over several years, and yes, there is a correlation. Yes, heredity is taking place here. Parents are passing on their genes regarding beak size. So here's a graph showing normal rainfall, and this shows the average beak depth, so in between 9 and 10, okay? So it says all Daphne birds, 751, and actually you will see this. This is the actual data that you will crunch in Excel. But then in 1978, we went through a drought where there was only 90 individuals left, so N is the sample size. And notice the mean has shifted. So question from, a review question from yesterday, is this disruptive, directional, or stabilizing? Directional, because it's being shifted one way. So we're shifting the mean. If it was stabilizing, you'd see a higher peak at 9.5. So it'd still be 9.5, but these guys would be gone, and
It would make the bit middle taller.
Yep. And then disruptive would mean you take out the middle and you have 2 humps on the extreme ends. So, my goodness. This is the only class where it does that. Like this, it just freaks out. Okay, here is a cladogram showing how the species have evolved from other species. Notice that there are some fill in the blanks, okay? But they do believe that all the finches came from a common ancestor from the South American mainland, and then branched out into 3 big groups and then even smaller. But there are 14 known species today. That's the one that we're going to focus, that's the one I was just talking about, the medium ground finch. All right, here's some more evidence for natural selection, and I think Mr. Rourke has talked about this one: peppered moths and the industrial melanism. What? Yes. Okay. So environment can change. Natural selection may favor one trait over the other in a species. So we have the peppered moth. Comes in a wide range of shades, light gray to speckled to jet black. And so moth color is a genetic trait. There are different alleles of a single gene. Black tends to be dominant and was rare before the 1850s. Okay, and then what do you guys know that happened in the 1850s? Industrial Revolution. So then all of a sudden we started to see increase of black, even though it was very, very rare, in these industrialized regions. So here's a picture of a tree with no soot, and you can see the you can see the black moth stand out. So if I was a bird, I can see that. Now, can you see the peppered moth?
I gotta guess where it's at. Bottom left corner.
Okay, so pretty good camouflage there. All right, here's a tree with some soot, and you can see that the black moth blends in pretty well. But if you're peppered, you stand out, so you're probably going to get eaten. Here's lichen-covered trunk, stands out. Here's lichen-free, soot-covered, again, stands out. So just showing. Here's a graph of the UK, showing how black peppered moth were more common in the industrialized regions, populated areas. This is more rural. So. All right, light-colored moths decreased because of selection by predation. So there were a few ecologists that went out to just observe this and document it. So J.W. Tutt suggested peppered forms were more visible to predators on city trees that have lost their lichen. Bernard Kettlewell released the same number of light and dark moths in two sets of woods, one that was polluted and one that was unpolluted. He set up traps to see how many survived. And so in Birmingham, which is the polluted one, he captured more dark moths, back recaptured versus white. And in Dorset, more white than dark, but these are still really low numbers in my opinion. So, caught birds on film eaten and did 8 separate filed studies. So, Kettlewell provided strong evidence for natural selection, and basically just implicates that birds are the agent of selection because you stand out, well, the bird's going to see you and eat you. Now, if the environmental conditions reverse, so does the selection pressure. So in industrialized areas where there's soot, dozens of other species evolved in the same way, so they call this industrialized melanism, where the organisms that are darker in color will just thrive. They're more predominant in that area over lighter ones because they're more camouflaged. The second half of the 20th century, however, the trend has now begun to reverse. And that's because, especially over in the UK, they're trying to be more green, and so there's a drop in air pollution. They're not using fossil fuels as much anymore. So we're seeing a switch back to it. Yeah. So see that pollution levels have decreased, and a number of melanic moths have as well. So. Sometimes, however, the agent of selection can be difficult to pin down. So, he got lucky capturing birds like on film, eating the moths. But peppered moths forms were more visible to predators on city trees and that have lost their lichen. So researchers have noticed that the selection against melanism does not appear to correlate with changes in tree lichen because they're also looking at tree lichen. So there's different variables that they're looking at. So at one location, light forms begin to increase in frequency long before the lichens reappeared because if there's lichen on the trees, it's going to be even more camouflaged. So it's like, what's going on here? There's been studies in Detroit. Lichens never changed significantly as dark moths first became dominant and then declined. So he hasn't really been able to find peppered moths in this area. Could pollution be the agent? I don't know. So there's still some unanswered questions with the agent of selection in other areas. Okay, let's take a look at, so that's natural selection. Artificial selection. So how humans can initiate the change, how we can be the selection pressure on these organisms. So with the rise of genetics in the 1920s and 30s with fruit fly Drosophila, we've been able to look at other animals and select for traits for some type of evolutionary response. Yesterday I showed you a diagram of bristles on the abdomens of fruit flies.
how they started off with an average. I think on that diagram it said 36, but in your book they give you another example of 9.5, and they just took the top 20% and then reproduced them, and then after 86 generations, the number of bristles was over 40 on the abdomen. So yeah, humans can drive selection pressures or change variation in organisms. So we've been able to do this with agricultural selection, increase in our crops and even change in the organism itself. So this is what corn used to look like. Did you guys know that? Oh, I'm not talking about the color. It's just that's what it used to look like. And through selective pressures, only crossing, certain breeds with each other, it has evolved into today's modern corn that we are more familiar with. Right-hand picture, Belgian blue cattle have been bred for increased meat production. So. We've been also been able to domesticate breeds. This is all through artificial selection. So cats, dogs, pigeons, we've domesticated them. Greyhounds, we bred them for maximum running ability because they have long legs, they have a long tail, and arch back to increase their stride length, as well as great muscle mass. So the Dutch Hound was used to hunt badgers on farm property because they're shorter stature, short legs, more narrow. They can get into a badger hole and fight it. The gray wolf, like all dogs, are pretty much descendants of a wolf. So yeah, we just have all these different breeds now. However, domestication does have some unintentional effects. So like the silver fox in Russia were very wild, but then we started to domesticate them and train them, and we did it too much, so they became very docile, which means that they were very, very needy and like always wanted to be petted, and they're just like around you and you can't even walk. They just want to be loved and want the attention. Yeah. Okay. Switching gears. So that's the one pillar of evolution is natural selection. So that includes natural selection, artificial selection. But now we're moving on to the other pillar where there's 4 kind of areas that support evolution. And the first one is the fossil record. Fossils. Our fossil record is never, ever, ever, ever going to be complete. And there's a lot of people out there that say, well, the fossil record's not complete. It's how can you use it as evidence? Well, it's like, do you even know what it takes to be a fossil? The organism has to be buried in sediment, and then the calcium in the bone has to mineralize, and then everything else has to harden to form that rock. This is very, very rare. It only happens in certain areas. Not to mention that Earth is constantly changing. We have plate tectonics, we have weathering and erosion. A lot of things are inaccessible to us. So we still use the fossil record as evolution, but just keep in mind that it's never, ever, 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 ever going to be complete, and probably some of the evidence that would support evolution is destroyed or gone. But the age of fossils is estimated by radioactive decay. So we use relative dating as well as absolute dating to figure out how old fossils are. Relative dating is where the fossil was found in relation to other rocks. And so the deeper it is, the older the fossil is compared to the top. I always tell my 8th graders, when people dig for fossils, you're basically going into a time machine. Because the deeper you go, the further back you go in time of Earth's history. Absolute dating is looking at the radioactive decay. So a lot of rocks do contain some radioactive elements, in this case uranium-238, and we know that uranium exists in various different forms of isotopes, and so what we're doing is we're figuring out what types of isotopes are found compared to the parent atom, and then you can figure out half-life and then get an estimate of how old it is. Yep.
You got a question right in the bowl the other day.
You did?
Yeah, what's the other type? Other than absolute dating, the other way that you used to find fossils.
And you said relative. That's awesome. I was going to say, I don't know if you guys know this, but when you go to a museum and they say that this is the actual fossil, like the actual fossil that they found, you may not know this, but that fossil has been painted with lead. A lot of the fossils that are displayed in museums are radioactive, so they have to paint them with lead to protect you. So they keep
keep that silent for some reason. It's kind of a, I almost wonder if there's a conspiracy theory.
Oh.
Wow, what's the conspiracy theory?
I have lots of them, so
Let's hear them.
What's your best one?
my best one,
Tell us all
that we
of
got it all wrong with history.
Oh.
So, I don't know. Okay. Fossils can, however, present a history of how things have changed. And so when you find a bunch of fossils and they all look very similar, you can kind of arrange them from oldest to youngest, and they can tell a story. Fossils do document the course of life throughout time, shows the waxing and waning of biodiversity. Some levels are filled with life, some levels are not. And so this can indicate mass extinctions. So I think we've had like 5 massive extinctions, and we're on the brink of our 6th one. And scientists say that it's human caused. So. But fossils have come into play showing transitional forms. So yeah, we have gaps in the fossil. Like I said, you have to have the right conditions in order for the fossil to actually become fossil. And then obviously recovery of it. You don't want to damage it. Will you find a fossil? Who knows? But there are some intermediate forms that have been found. And so one that's pretty famous is the Archaeopteryx, the ancient feathered fossil that was found recently. It's estimated to be 165 million years old. This is the intermediate between birds and dinosaurs. Birds and dinosaurs do have a lot of things in feathers. And one of the things that this is like transitional is like, yeah, the bones look like a dinosaur, but then we see these, which indicate feathers. So this is a drawing of that fossil. I mean, it's an artist's rendition. So always keep in mind that artists tend to be biased or skewed, but they're doing their best with what they have. But some traits, large eye, long neck, it's lightweight, the bones are slightly hollow, feathers for possibly flight. So then after the Archaeopteryx was found, dinosaurs like kind of captivated the world. There was a lot of like dinosaur shows on the Discovery Channel, and so it was like 3D renditions. So you could see something like a Velociraptor, looked like a Velociraptor, but had like feathers on it. It's just dinosaurs. The early 2000s were pretty popular. Okay, can also reveal patterns seen in intermediate fossils. So whales to hippopotamuses. So here, these would be like transitional forms. Now, notice there's a bunch of tiny little question marks here. Like I said, fossils are not always complete. Sometimes you find a head and you're like, where's the rest of the body? I don't know. But here we have like a limb, like a hand, and in the beginning of a pelvis of some sort to get the hind legs. And then they have, okay, well, the skull has changed. It's shortened a little bit, but we don't have the body for it. And we have this, so what's the missing link? So traits evolve at different rates at different times. 4-legged aquatic mammal discovered, that whale and dolphin from land-dwelling hoofed ancestor. That's where they're derived from. And in fact, like I said, semester 2, you'll actually get a cladogram, and you'll make a cladogram with some information about this.
So that's what's causes the dolphins.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, this one was just recently the transitional form between fish and amphibians. Like, so fish have like a 2-chambered heart, and amphibians have a 3-chambered heart, and reptiles and mammals have a 4-chambered heart. So there's this like transitional, thing. Where did one branch off from another? And so the Tiktaalik is the bridge between fish and the first amphibians. And so yes, it says missing link is found. They found it way up here. They have this fossil. They had this fossil, and they're like, how did life inhabit land? There's got to be some type of transitional form. And so yeah, they found it with the Tiktaalik, which is this fossil right here. Notice it's kind of in rough shape in my opinion. But they noticed that in this fossil that there was the beginning of a pectoral fin, but it wasn't really complete. And they have found in this fossil, okay, this is a pretty complete hind limb here. So the transitional's got to be somewhere in between. And so they found a fossil that is like this. I think this is a species that is alive today. And they think that this might be an offspring of that, or like a descendant of that species. It's either that, or I should probably look it up to see if it's an artist rendition, but that looks real to me. So.
Horses is another prime example of evidence from fossils. So the family Equidae, this includes horses, zebras, donkeys, I won't say that word, large, long-legged, fast-moving animals adapted to live in open areas, grasslands. We only have one genus left. Genus Eques is the last living descendants. So they're suggested that there might have been more. But the first horse, me, I've heard this, was very, very small, short-legged, broad feet, about the size of a dog. And the thing that they focus on is the toe reduction in horse. So modern have a single toe, so today it's just one toe enclosed in a bony hoof. But back then, like the first horse had 4 toes and 3 hind feet, and it was almost like a fleshy pad. And so through time, as the environment changed from jungle-like, tropical to open grassland plain, so did the horse. Tooth size and shape also changed, and this is why this also strengthens the idea from jungle to grassland, because grasses can have strong teeth to break that down, and the teeth became flatter and flatter. So these changes are understood as adaptations to the changing global climates. I mean, like Minnesota used to be on the equator. We had volcanoes in the northern parts where we get our Masadi range. So it's just. So here's a diagram, flow chart, going back in time, first horse to the modern horse. And you can see that the toe reduction just keeps decreasing, suggestion because of the environment, grassland, open area versus jungle. So there's the teeth. Okay, that was fossil record. Here's anatomical evidence for evolution. So I want to talk about homologous structures versus analogous structures. And so homologous structures means common origin. Okay, so common derive, like they all came from the same at one point. Classic example is looking at limbs between humans, cats, lizards, bats, whales, frogs, and birds. They all have a humerus. They all have a radius and ulna. They all have carpals. They all have phalanges. Okay, so it's like same, we have the same structure here, so it's got to be, we had to have a similar origin. We also have early embryonic development. If you look at fish, reptile, bird, and even human, we had gill slits at one time, but the gill slits turn into pharyngeal glands later on. Okay, so very similar early on, but then they become more different as they develop. So glands and ducts from the pharyngeal buds, fish, they turn into gills. Some structures are imperfectly suited for their use. So I like to bring into the giraffes. Why do giraffes have long necks? Like, giraffes are mammals. Most mammals only have 7 vertebrae in their neck. Okay, giraffes only have 7 vertebrae. So that those vertebrae in the giraffe's neck are pretty thick. Giraffes are mammals. So how many chambers do they have in their heart? 4. Okay, now that long neck, that heart's got to get that blood up the neck to the head. So if you look at a giraffe's heart, it's very similar to ours, maybe a little bit larger, but one side of the ventricle is really, really thick, super, super thick. That's to push that blood up to the neck to the head.
One smaller than, so
What?
more pressure. Is it up in the neck then skinnier because they're thinner because they get more
You know what?
pressure?
I don't think so, because at the Science Museum right now they have an exhibit, and it's called biomechanics, and they look at animal forms, and they have like a model giraffe with the heart, and you get to like actually pump the heart, and the tube that the blood is going up, it's thick, and like you're like squeezing this, and you're like, oh my god, my hand's gonna you're like, oh my, I can't do this, like it's a workout, and you have to like pump the blood all the way up the giraffe's neck. It's insane. But the thing is, it can only work with what it has. Okay, so like, because giraffes are mammals and they only have 7 vertebrae, it's not like natural selection says, hey, let's have your neck have, 25 vertebrae. It works with what it has, so it makes the vertebrae thicker. You can't add more vertebrae. That's not how natural selection works. It's like a beaver. It's not going to say, I wish I had a chainsaw to cut down trees. No, it's just going to work on what it has, in this case, the front teeth. Does that make sense? Like, things don't just magically appear. It just works on what it has in the organism.
How do, say geese have 25 then?
It's because they're birds. Birds are different from mammals. So. Okay, here's another thing that's imperfect. I don't know if you guys know this, but our eyes are not perfect. Okay, I mean they're wonderful organs. I mean, I don't know if you've seen people that are colorblind and they put on those glasses and then they can see color again. There's like videos going out around the internet, but it's like, they're like, oh my god, this is what the world looks like. What have I been missing out on? You know,
Why
but
don't they just give everyone this colorblind a pair of those?
I'm kind of curious to see if that would work on my husband, but I don't think it would because his cones are damaged. So,
What happened to you?
farming accident. You can only see in shades of gray. It happened like in high school, so then, so he like knew that the sky was blue and all that. So when he looks at it like a painting, he's like, well, I know the sky is blue, but that's the shade of gray. So. But in vertebrae, the eye kind of faces backwards to the wall of the eye. So here you have like your eye cells, and then they have the nerve ending. And this is why you have a blind spot in your eyes, because they all like conjoin at one point. If you look at the cephalopod, well, light comes in from this way, and the nerve endings are on the back side, so they don't have blind spots. So it's like, well, why? This is imperfect. Like, how come we don't have eyes like
I remember when I
cephalopods?
first discovered the blind spot, and I was so like,
Yeah, we did it in remarks, and I was like,
Okay, so but the blind spot is because that's where all the bundle fibers meet. That's where the optic nerve is. So. Okay, another type of anatomy structure, vestigial structures. They're explained as holdovers from the past. So we do have some vestigial structures in humans, like body hair. What's the purpose of body hair? The appendix. However, I've been reading some scientific articles about the appendix and how the appendix is still being used in some way. Like I don't remember. I just glanced through the article.
our wisdom teeth. Why do we have wisdom teeth? We don't chew grass anymore. They're unneeded. Ear muscles. There are some humans that can wiggle their ears and like move them. My uncle could, or not my uncle, my grandpa could. And so this suggests that, when we lived out in the plains and we were on the low end of the totem pole, we could hear, like we could move our ears to pick up sound, make sure we weren't getting eaten by a predator. Why do males have nipples, tonsils? Anyone here still have their tonsils? Just curious. Okay, yeah, me too. Okay. When I was in high school, it's like everyone got their tonsils. I'm like, why? I don't get it. Okay. But these are all vestigial structures. Now, some vestigial structures in other organisms, boa constrictors actually have hip bones. Okay, I'm videotaping. I probably just picked up.
my bad.
Okay, so they still have a pelvis and this reduced femur. Why? Maybe at one point they did have legs. Okay, baleen whales also have pelvic bones. Manatees have fingernails.
ratchet.
All right, moving on to another branch of evidence, convergent evolution in the biogeographical record. So biogeography is looking at geographic distribution of species. So at one point, Earth was one supergiant continent called Pangaea, and people have found fossils in South America and Africa. And it's like, well, how did they get there? And that's because of supercontinent. So it reveals that different geographic areas sometimes inhibit groups of plants and animals that were strikingly similar, even though they are still distant related. So we call that convergent evolution. So we do have some examples of this convergent evolution. Marsupials and placentals demonstrate convergence. So at one point they shared a common ancestor, but then some kind of divide separated them, and they evolved in similar ways, but they were in different parts of the world. So if you don't know the difference between a marsupial and a placental, marsupials, they have a pouch. So like when a baby kangaroo is born, it's like literally this size. It just stays in the pouch until it's ready to come out. Okay? And that's where it develops. Placentals, they stay inside until they're born.
So like instead of being inside like a womb, they're like
In this little pouch.
Yeah.
so like they could come out.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, like that's I mean, you can Google baby kangaroo, like, and you'll just see it. They're cute. So marsupials young are born in a very immature condition. They're held in the pouch until they're ready to emerge and be safe. Placentals not born until they can safely survive in their external environments. So Australia is separated from the mainland. We'll say 70 million years ago, and this is about the same time that marsupial and placental mammals evolved. But because they're in different places, we have marsupials on Australia, and the only placental on Australia are bats and a few rodents.
Why would they evolve? Like, what would be an advantage of it either way?
I don't know. The only thing I can think of is, obviously they have that barrier, and maybe something with the environment. I'm not exactly sure.
Maybe it's because they jump and it's easier to hold them in a pouch than it is to.
Possibly. So like bats and a few rodents, well, bats fly, so that would make sense. Like there's no barrier for them. Rodents, the only thing I can think of is like people, but I don't know. So what are marsupials like? Well, they resemble placental mammals today. So if you look at a mole of, versus placental and marsupial, they look pretty similar. We have an anteater. We call them numbats in Australia. There's a mouse, the lemur, flying squirrel, flying flanger, bobcat, Tasmanian tiger cat, wolf, Tasmanian wolf. I thought they were extinct.
Why was everything bigger back in the day? Yeah, those Tasmanian wolves are extinct. Why was everything bigger back in the day? Because they always talk about like the giant, sloth or whatever. It's like 12 feet long.
So like the giant
What about those
beaver
like
that lived in
huge
it.
like lizards?
Komodo dragons?
Or the
They're still out.
Or the
They're still
Titan boa, 40 feet long, 2,500 pounds.
Convergent evolution is a widespread phenomena. If you look at dolphins and sharks and tuna and their hydrodynamics, they've developed different ways to overcome drag. Island trees are usually tall, have a tough outer covering, but they're located elsewhere. If you were to take an island tree and transplant it elsewhere, it would be a flower. So all palm trees are members of the sunflower family. So I don't know if you know that. Okay, biogeographical studies provide further evidence of evolution. So islands missing common animals are found on continents. Species present on the island have derived from those continental relatives. If you look at island species, they're closely related to species on nearby continents. So like finches would be a great example of that. You have to look at how island species were dispersed there. Sometimes you have the absence of some plants and animals, and that provides opportunities for others to thrive in that. And then we always have to keep in mind continental drift, how continents today, that's not where they were. Antarctica, underneath all that snow and ice, was a tropical rainforest. Okay. Well, that does it for today.